So, welcome to Filibusted's first official live stream. Today, we're going to be talking about the question that USA Today recently asked: is Trump actively tanking the economy, and why aren't Republicans stopping him? Those darn Republicans. You had one job: to stop the man you voted into power from doing his job. Come on. All right. Keep up, Republicans. So, will Trump's tariffs result in an economic recession, or will they not? Will things self-stabilize? Are we in the calm before the storm? Stick around. We're going to find out in today's episode. So we're going to let Doug Smith take it from here, and he's going to give us the rundown of some of the recent news regarding the tariffs, regarding Trump's economic plan, regarding the pushback from other nations, the reciprocal tariffs, those kind of things. Doug, what do you got for us?
Okay, well, I'm sure everybody knows about all the contention between the U.S. and Canada, and that has been quite the little tit for tat, and it's been interesting to watch, to say the least. But some of the facts and numbers are: Trump increased the tariffs on steel and aluminum imports on all of them to 25%, threatened to do another 25% to Canada. Canada quickly backed down on their threats. Trump backed down on that threat. So now we're just still hanging out at the 25% mark. And Trump plans to tax some more imports from the European Union, Brazil, South Korea by charging reciprocal rates starting April 2nd. And they have also threatened, all those countries have threatened to hit back again with other tariffs. And this is going to be in the realm of $28 billion or so worth of tariffs on both sides. The EU is countering with their tariffs, and that's taking effect on April 1st, funny enough. So we're going to see whether or not that's really a joke. The tariff war with Canada continues to escalate, and the number one thing that I wanted to point out that will be a good topic for discussion about all of this is the fact that part of the goal for these tariffs isn't necessarily related to money. It's actually to reduce the trafficking on the border. And that's I've got a document that we'll share later on with that, but we can get into some of these tariff talks with the actual money. So the concern from everybody across the board is that, number one, this is going to raise prices for goods everywhere, right? And number two, it's just going to put us into a tariff war, and it's just going to get worse from here on. And there's going to be billions of dollars spent just for what appears to be, pride on all sides of the spectrum. So do you guys have any thoughts on that? What are your opinions?
Yeah, I'll just throw in my initial opinion is I feel like as Americans, I don't want to jump onto the America First bandwagon 110%. I don't want to go, because I've seen some extreme views when it comes to America First that I don't completely agree with. However, I do believe that the whole cancel culture, social media world that we live in today, the make everything fair for everybody and give everybody a participation trophy instead of a participation ribbon. I feel like that has infiltrated politics to an extent. And I feel like, especially over the last 4 years during the Biden administration, what we've seen is, and even previous to that, we've seen a whole ton of don't make any waves, don't put any pressure on anybody else. If somebody else puts pressure on you, just cave, just do whatever anybody else expects you to do. That whole idea, and I feel like there's a lot of leverage, hopefully, that the United States still has that we're not using. And I do believe that Trump is attempting to bring some of that leverage back into play.
Yeah. My take on this is, people want to say, okay, it's America first, America first. What this to me really is to stop putting America last, because America has been being taken advantage of. I mean, we could go through, I've worked in global manufacturing and supply chain industry for 20 years. And this is actually, we have 200 to 300% tariffs on things. Canada tariffs, the US dairy imports. Okay. So like exports. So we don't export their dairy. And so this is just an example. Let's see, Europe has the same thing for agriculture. So this is less about protectionism. It's about putting things the way they should be. We've had unfair trade practices around the world against the United States for decades. And, really Europe should be explaining, why do they deserve a $2 billion trade surplus? Like, that's insane. Like, that makes zero sense at all. And it's the same thing with China. And it's the same, all our policies are what have led to this happening. And so now we're looking at this in like this little box, like just kind of forgetting the last 50 years of global trade and what's really been happening and what other countries are already doing to us. I mean, we have government subsidies in China. There's all kinds of stuff that just chops the legs out from underneath America. And like you said, Troy, you said it perfect. We've got a lot of leverage that we're not using. And now Trump is finally using that leverage. And it's not to take advantage of the situation. It's to put things back the way they should be, which is fair trade. That's exactly what is happening. And if we have to put pressure in order to get people to act the way they should, then we got to put a little extra pressure, and we could put some of that leverage to work.
That's and I think we've had a short attention span for this has been going on for a long time, but people they're only seeing what just happened in the news very recently, and then they assume that is the entirety of what's been happening. And it's actually just been different not different, but it's been this way for a long time. And we're just now starting to see somebody do something about it. So now it's the wound is being reopened, but people are thinking it's a fresh stab wound, and it's not. This has been happening for a while. Yeah.
And you see Europeans getting up and talking about how they're going to do reciprocal tariffs on this. And it's like, well, even your reciprocal tariffs aren't taking it's just going to be worse in their favor. Like, that's exactly what it is. Like, we're basically closing, like, you have their favor, our favor way down here. We do some tariffs. We kind of come up a little bit, and they do more tariff. That's like, we're just closing a gap.
It already has happened on
global trade practices.
On X this morning, I saw that Trump just threatened to do a 200% tariff on European wines and champagne.
Wow.
I mean, and people think that, it's just going to hit the consumer. It's just going to, look, we need to have a little bit of a long-term view here, because everybody, all these policies, people just have a short-term view, and they take the way the left frames it. They take the way the opposition frames it. And we can't do that. We got to think for ourselves, take the big picture, think short-term, medium-term, and long-term for all people groups, all countries. Like, when I say America first, it's really about doing the right thing that actually represents the interests of our country, instead of just taking our own legs out from underneath us and just giving everybody else what they want. And then that's actually taking advantage of we the people. And that's not we can't do it that way anymore.
Right. And, everybody's seen those viral video clips of a runner at the end of a race stumbling and falling, and another runner coming up, picking them up and helping them cross the finish line. Right. And I think that's what America has historically done in a lot of different cases for a lot of different nations. Now, we're not perfect at that, and we've also made huge mistakes as well. But as a runner in a race, and I do CrossFit, so I understand this. You have to be well nourished. You have to take care of your body. You have to take protein powder after you work out. You have to do all these things. And if you're not hydrated, it's like, how am I going to be in a position where I can help anybody else if I'm not even helping myself? And if I'm falling apart, falling to pieces. And I think that is what's been happening to America over the last few decades, unfortunately, in a lot of ways. And I believe Trump is trying to set some of those things right. Now, I'm not 100% defending everything that he's doing with tariffs, but I would like to answer some of these questions here. This question of what is Trump trying to do? So I have a list of things that, according to Trump, he's trying to do through these tariffs. Some of these are a little bit more short term. And I think Doug and Ryan have been saying, some of these things are long term. And even Trump himself has said it's going to take some time, but it's going to be well worth the wait is what he's claiming. So this is the first one, is he's trying to boost U.S. manufacturing. And that's interesting because it goes into a whole nother issue that we can get into in a few minutes. But the second thing is it's going to protect jobs. This is what Trump is claiming it's going to do. The third thing is he's trying to raise tax revenue and grow the domestic economy. And the fourth thing is he wants to restore America's trade balance with its foreign partners. And that's what y'all have been talking about, obviously. So is Doug, I don't know if we're okay to get into this now or not, but some of the alternative reasons, but hitting one of those points, I had this idea of, if y'all have ever seen the cartoon with the Roadrunner and the wolf or the fox or what, the coyote. The Wile E. Coyote,
man. Come on.
And he's, did I steal your reference?
No. Yeah. I just couldn't believe that you can remember that it was the coyote.
I know, it's terrible. It's a coyote. It should be easy to remember. He's always ordering weapons and traps and booby traps, all these things from this company called Acme, right? And that's his arsenal that he uses against the Roadrunner, right? But what if one day Acme didn't deliver anymore? What if one day they said, we're not going to sell to you anymore, right? The whole show would be in the toilet, right? There wouldn't be an episode anymore. And that's one of the things that Trump is essentially trying to stop is, and this, I'm going to actually read this. One of the things that I read this week is that the president insists that steel imports are a threat to the very existence of the United States. We don't have, as an example, steel and a lot of other things. This is quoting Donald Trump. We don't have a military, and frankly, we just won't have a country very long. He said this last week in his joint address to Congress. It's this whole idea of if you need something to be able to defend yourself, like steel, in a war effort, and you rely too heavily on importing that from another nation, then essentially you're putting your nation in their hands. And if you can't produce it yourself, if the manufacturing is not there in your home country, then you're out of luck when it comes down to trying to defend yourself once it comes to it. So you're that coyote ordering from Acme, and Acme says, "Oh, we're not going to sell to you anymore,"
or
like, okay.
Acme sells you really bad steel that causes damage.
Right. To be fair, Acme's products were never very good in the cartoons.
That's true.
Right.
That's true. That's a good point. Although, he
was constantly blowing himself up and stuff. So
if I could hop in on that, the whole steel situation for a little bit. So this is kind of interesting because we have a precedent for this now because of when Trump was in the first time, he actually put tariffs on steel. And I do think that it's important. I think I'm probably going to be the one pushing back the most against the tariffs because I do have some pretty strong opinions about, at very least, the short-term unintended consequences that can happen when you start slapping tariffs on things. I 100% agree with the United States has been like the parent of the world and like given way too much out and allowed like its kids to like steal money from its wallets for decades and decades. And it would take a long time to get into why that has been since World War II, but that has been the case. And so I understand we are putting tariffs on countries because they've had tariffs on us for a long time. Hopefully maybe that'll cause them to bring things back down. But just for the steel for just a second, just so we're aware of some of the unintended consequences that can happen. I understand we want to produce steel for security reasons. I definitely don't want us to be buying steel from China. I don't think we should be buying anything from China. Buying things from Canada, I don't think we're ever going to go to war with Canada. So buying steel from Canada, I don't think is a problem. Buying steel from most European countries, I really don't think is a problem. However, if we're talking about what happens when you start slapping these tariffs on things, back in 2018 to 2020, we slapped 25% tariffs on steel. And that might have helped us security wise. Okay, we're producing steel more in-house, but it actually raised prices for steel across the board. And in some ways, it actually hurt manufacturing in the United States. And how is that possible? Well, the reason being is because for every one job we have in the United States for where people are actually making steel right now, we have 80 jobs where people in the United States are using steel and turning it into something else. So we have a lot more companies that were buying steel from Canada or steel from other places. We still do. We're buying cheaper steel from outside the United States and then making something out of it here in the United States. And so the estimates that I looked at, they seem to be for the most part that we gained some jobs. If we're talking just purely jobs, purely like economic growth in the United States, we gained some jobs in the steel industry, but we lost actually more jobs in other manufacturing here in the United States because the price of steel went up. Not only the price of imported steel, but at first, the price of American steel went up because the American steel producers weren't able to keep up with the demand because you can't just make steel manufacturing plants overnight. But that's part of the long-term strategy that you guys were talking about. Over long-term, eventually we could catch up and make more steel. But we need to understand at the get-go, these tariffs are very likely to just raise prices. And unfortunately, we've been in a rough place economically and inflation has been really high. So there's a good chance that there's going to be some blowback from this. I would say even from voters, from consumers, we're suddenly seeing, oh, wait, everything just got more expensive.
So we need to think about how supply chains and business really works. So like I worked many years for a large multinational corporate, John Deere, a large multinational corporation. I was a supply-based manager. And so I had a strategy that I had to build globally. So we had plants all over the world. And sometimes a global strategy for a large manufacturer is the sum of regional strategies. And sometimes it's one strategy for the entire globe for all the plants. So here's an example. I was living in the US and trying to find a certain parts, and they're not made in the US because we want to buy them from the US because it costs less to ship them and they're big parts, but we had to get them from Brazil, for example. And Brazil said, well, if you want to use China steel for these parts, it's this price. If you want to use Brazil steel for the parts, it's this other price. Why is that? Because China does unfair things like subsidize raw materials, and they give rebates to their exporters, and they manipulate their currency. They do all kinds of things. That's just an example, and so all of these things, we were trying to make a deal with the company to put a plant in the US, but the incentives weren't there because of the US trade policy and the way that the U.S. treats the businesses. And so what this is doing, I want to talk a little bit about the other short-term. We talk about negative short-term impact, but let's talk about some other short-term impacts. So Apple said they're planning a $500 billion U.S. investment, 20,000 research jobs in the next 4 years. TSMC is a chip giant. They make chips. They're spending $100 billion in the U.S. over the next 4 years. This is after Trump's announcements. And so these are just a couple of things. I mean, Honda is also, they were going to make the next Civic in Mexico. Now they're going to make it in the US. And so, I mean, I've worked also in making decisions on, are we going to make this in the US or are we going to make it in Mexico? And there's lots of things that go into that. I mean, you have a global manufacturing footprint, but guess what has a lot to do with that? The policy of the country. And so we had a company that was debating whether they were going to put it on the border of the U.S. Mexico, a new plant. Is it going to be on the border in the U.S. or is it going to be on the border in Mexico? And so maybe they put it on the border of the U.S. and then they can still get Mexican labor who drive across the border. I mean, there's all kinds of things. So it's not so simple. But at the same time, it's not only negative short-term effects.
Right.
Yeah,
and I think
I
at some
understand
point we've got to rip that Band-Aid off too. Like, you're not wrong, Reese. We are going to experience some negative results from this, but we have to correct this back the right way. And we're not going to get out of this unscathed one way or the other. And I think that this is going to be the better way to do it, so that the pain is short term, because long term is going to be better for us. And I think that a lot of the American voters knew that going into this. We knew that that's what Trump was going to do. And that's kind of what we voted for. Like, just rip it off, man. Let's do this. Let's get it done with.
If I can push back against that a little bit, I would say, I think that a lot of the voters, they wanted a stronger economy and they want lower prices because prices have gone up quite a bit. I would say, so one of the things that Trump has done that has been really, really good is they have focused on cutting government waste, which then will allow for lower taxes. And even the first time around, he was incredible at lowering regulation. I think this is something that conservatives usually agree on, which is if you lower taxes and you lower regulation, it makes for a better business environment in the United States. It's just cheaper. Everything's cheaper. Everything's easier. You can start. There's more opportunities. There's more businesses. There's more growth. I can hire more people because it's cheaper to operate. Right. I think this is one of the things that we need to understand is that tariffs is a tax. It is a barrier to trade. So if you talk about we want to reduce barriers of trade, I think the best way of doing that is to reduce taxes, reduce regulation, and then probably the third most important piece is reduce cost of energy, which is another thing that Trump wants to do. He wants us to drill more. I'm hoping at some point we really start investing in nuclear power so we can have other types of really cheap, efficient energy, as well as fossil fuels, and just having lots of options. I mean, nuclear power is just super efficient, so it could eventually create really, really cheap energy. But obviously, gasoline is really cheap as well. So those are three things right there that like make for really cheap and efficient ways of doing business in the United States. It lowers the prices without putting up a barrier to trade. Because once you start slapping greater tariffs, I understand that we have people have tariffs against us. But once you start slapping tariffs onto other countries, now businesses in the United States have less options for where they can buy from, and things become more expensive. So I would like to see, this is my one point about this, I would like to see the use of these tariffs for negotiation purposes to get countries to do what we want them to do, to then lower tariffs so that we can have a better place on the global trade, so that we're not being taken advantage of, in the sense that we can send our goods overseas and they're not being taxed like crazy going into other countries. And Trump,
that's the entire point.
I know I've been talking for a little bit, but Trump he did that really well at the beginning of this year. He forced Canada to take the borders seriously, to take the drug problem seriously. He forced Mexico to do the same. He forced Colombia to take their immigrants back. And I think that's a great use of tariffs. I am very hesitant to say tariffs are a good long-term strategy. We need them across the board. I think they're better as a negotiating tool, but at some point you have to take them back once countries start doing what you want, except for China, because I think we should just sanction China. I don't think we should be trading with China at all.
China's a whole nother
tariffs
beast.
against China is a great idea in my opinion, but
China's a whole nother beast that we can dive into. But yeah, you need to see this as a part of a bigger plan. Tariffs, you can't look at tariffs in isolation. It's I mean, we can talk about the economics 101 of tariffs, but that's not the way this is being used. It's used exactly like you said. It's a negotiation principle to get other countries to act in the way they should act, to align with what should be happening from a global trade perspective. And that's not what has happened. And we got in this position because our leaders and policies had short-term incentives, had short-term vision. They didn't have long-term vision. They didn't look at the fact that, okay, we're going to let China in the World Trade Organization, and that's going to gut American manufacturing. And look, we'll let them in, and then they'll fix all their human rights violations and unfair practices. Like that's the opposite. They've exported communism and socialism, and they're having more influence. But they overproduction, they artificially lower prices because government pays them to make more things. Like there's all kinds of terrible things that are done. And so this has to happen in order to put things right. And like you said, and then when people are operating the way they should, well, who knows how long that's going to take. But I mean, that's a part of the bigger plan. You have reduced income taxes, you have reduced government spending, all kinds of other things. That's a part of this plan. It's not isolated. Oh, tariffs is going to solve every problem.
Yes, right. So I want to address, Reese, what you said about the other tariffs coming down. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick was interviewed about a potential recession this last week. And here was his response. He kind of talks in a similar style to Donald Trump, I feel like, but he said, absolutely not. He's talking about, should we be bracing for recession? He said, Donald Trump is a winner. He's going to win for the American people. There's going to be no recession in America. This is his opinion. And then here was his reasoning. He said, global tariffs are going to come down. Yeah. And then he started talking about how, if somebody else is going to put 100% tariff on us, which some are, then we're going to push back and put 100% tariff on them. And he's saying, and then they're going to say, well, then maybe we were wrong in saying we wanted to put 100%, like, let's adjust this number, and what we saw in 2018 was, Trump, like you said earlier, Reese, Trump did put tariffs on things like steel during his first term. But even the tariffs that Trump imposed and put into place, even those tariffs, he eventually lowered, and lessened. And so I think there is a negotiating tactic there. Yeah. And so I think that's part of what we're seeing.
Yeah, and I agree with you on that, Reese. That if the point that I was making seemed to contradict that, then I apologize. But I do think that the tariffs are just a negotiation tool and that's the short term that I'm talking about. That's the painful short term that we're going to have to be dealing with, and then hopefully it resolves. And Trump has just used it, like we've been saying, as leverage to make things right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like the U.S. has been enabling all these other countries and regions to take advantage of the U.S. for decades, and it's kind of like we wake up now, okay, and we're gonna and they're trying to call our bluff by saying, oh, well, we're gonna tariff you more, we're gonna do this more, and then trying to give us a lecture about Ukraine when they spend more money buying energy from Russia than they do defending Ukraine. Like it's virtue signaling to the max, like it's insanity, and so but they're going to find out because Trump's a businessman. He really knows the leverage we have. It's going to come out. And so they're going to try and push back, and they're going to get hit even harder. And then they're going to finally fold because they don't have the cards. They don't have the position. They don't have the leverage. And it's not about taking advantage. It's about being done, getting taken advantage of, and putting things the way they should be. And it's calling people to the table and saying, look, either act the way you should act or else. And that's what it's going to be. And then they're going to have long-term implications. That's actually going to impact their country because they're not operating the way they should be.
And to be clear, I'm really not concerned about, this might sound heartless, I'm not concerned about the United States taking advantage of other countries and saying, like, slapping these tariffs on other countries. I'm more concerned about us shooting ourselves in the foot to try to take out somebody else's leg, which is is how long-term broad tariffs can be.
Yeah,
Unless,
but like you
of
said,
course, unless you're doing what Trump is doing, which is what he hopefully is.
right.
How
And
this
it's not
ends
about
up.
hurting other countries. That's not at all what
Right.
it's about. It's about helping other countries to stop taking advantage of the US. And that's okay, then they have artificial success. Then it's not something they should have.
So I want to bring this conversation back to the original question and kind of reiterate this. Are we going to see a recession this year, economic recession? And maybe what are y'all's thoughts on that? And what's the good news? So I want to start with this point. One thing we have seen that Reese brought up earlier was the whole idea of business deregulation. And that's something that Trump has been talking about. And so I watched an interview from Goldman Sachs CEO earlier this week. And his name is David Solomon. And one of the things that he talked about was that he had just gotten out of a businessman roundtable with Trump, where Trump literally, I watched part of it where Trump sits in front of like hundreds of, massive corporation CEOs and businessmen, and owners, and essentially addresses them and says, hey, here's what we're trying to do. Here's what we're trying to do to fix the economy. Here's the things you can expect from us. And one of the things he said, we never got anything like this in Biden's administration. Like we never had any communication. We didn't know what to expect next. And he's like, Trump is actually trying to help the economy. He's trying to help the American businesses. And one of the other things he mentioned was he was saying it's not just the major corporations and it's not just the largest businesses, but he said Goldman Sachs actually recently did a survey on small businessmen where I think they surveyed 10,000 small business owners. And they asked them, like, what are your concerns? What are the things that would help, right? And one of the things that the small business owners, and these are people who he said, like, the $500 in a month is a difference for them. So they're small business owners, right? And he said one of the things, there was 63% of them said deregulation would help our business, and the overregulation and the red tape currently is stopping us from being productive. And this is the smallest business owners, like these are the small business owners, not the large corporations. And he's saying 63% of them said deregulation would help us tremendously, and that was a point he was trying to make, is that's one of the main things that Trump addressed. So there's a lot of things that Trump is trying to address when it comes to the economy, coming from that business minded background, that either weren't being addressed before or have needed to be, in the last administration, or have needed to be addressed for a long time, and they're finally getting around to it. So I think for that reason, I think that's one of the main things that I would look at when it comes to the economy is, what are the business leaders saying? What are they expecting? Because here's the thing about economists, and this is just my personal opinion. I could be wrong about this, but to me, and I'm sorry for all the economists out there that I'm hurting your feelings right now. But some people will say, well, and also to the teachers as well. There's lovely teachers that I know that do an amazing job, and we need teachers. But some people say, well, if you can't do, then teach, right? And so it's like that idea of you're teaching something, but you don't have the experience. So it's like, I would rather hear an economic perspective from a business leader than somebody who has an economy degree. Because it's like, well, what have you ever done with that? Like that would be the question. Yeah. Like, show me what you've done, and then we'll talk, economics, So that's my, maybe that's a inflated opinion there, but that's my thought on it, is what are the business leaders saying? And one of the things that he said specifically is he said, as businessmen, the business people, we understand what Trump is trying to do. That's what he said. Yeah. We understand what Trump is trying to do with the tariffs. He said, I don't like the direct results, the immediate direct results of everything that happens after you start slapping tariffs. But he said, but we understand what he's trying to do in the long term. And so to me, I'm like, okay, I'm going to take some, solace in that. That's going to console me a little bit, because maybe I don't fully understand what he's trying to do, but it's like, that's the person I'm going to ask and say, do you understand what he's trying to do? And so what are y'all's thoughts? What are some of the positive thoughts when it comes to a potential recession and the economy?
I think that there's so many different things happening right now with, Doge and the federal regulations being lessened and all the other things that Trump is doing. And also the stock market and the digital currency market, if you want to call it that. A lot of things are going to be manifesting and taking place that are going to help alleviate a lot of the stress of a potential recession. I think that we are very potentially going to have some type of recession, because it's going to be part of that pain of pulling the Band-Aid off. But I think that Trump has been doing so many different things. Well, Trump and his administration has been doing so many things kind of more under the radar that are going to just like ease that pain a little bit. And I actually am really curious to see how it works out with the digital currency world right now, because of the potential that it could actually reduce a lot of the financial burden on this country if it's done right. And that is still in the process. So hopefully what happens is all the economy boosting things that are happening in the background kind of take the place of the negative impact of what would naturally happen from a coming recession from all of these tariffs and the tariff wars and everything related to that.
Yeah, some people hold the opinion that we're not truly in an economic recession until somebody important says we're in an economic recession.
I mean, you could think of it that way, especially
How
since
important do you have to be to make that call? That's
Pretty
I
important.
think-
Pretty important. I
there's
tried
a lot
saying
of-
it on my Facebook page the other day. It didn't work. No, just kidding.
There's a lot of factors that go into a recession and all kinds of things. And of course, if that does come, they can spin it as something that Trump's policies and everything shook up and caused, which is as kind of like, I mean, there's a Titanic. It takes a lot to turn a Titanic around. And so it's his policies are not what's going to be that causes that. If anything, it's going to help harden America against the recession. It's going to help us be better prepared, because I mean, just look at what we saw with the longshoremen, the labor unions on the ports, and how much control they have. They don't run 24 hours a day, and they don't want automation, and they want all these things. And it's all these things that are keeping us from being competitive on the global market from a port perspective. And then we had a port in California that was going to sell to China. Like, there's so much national security interest in having these policies in place and principles in place, and not having a supply chain that is vulnerable to a bad actor taking advantage of the U.S. And so this was okay. And I'm not going to say any company names, but major corporations in the U.S. had a decoupling from China strategy. So it's not that they're moving away from China, but they saw what happened in the last 5 years, and we already knew about this, but it's almost like we all kind of knew it, and we go to sleep and we know it, but then we finally saw, oh, it's real. We need to do something about this. And so they would put a decoupling strategy together to where they would be like having second tooling at another supplier in another location, not in China, in case something happened with China. And then we could fire it up right away, and we don't have to rely on that. And it doesn't destroy the ability to produce an automobile or produce a bicycle or whatever it is. You need to harden the supply chain to make it more robust. And those are the kind of geopolitical factors that companies are thinking about. And so it's about time the U.S. government starts thinking about it.
For sure. Right. Absolutely. If I could hop in on I agree with you guys said, if I could hop in on the regulation piece, I personally think that lowering regulations will be the thing that will save the economy, even will buffer us against some of the initial negative backlash that will happen with the tariffs in place. If Trump's administration can lower regulation enough, I think that will make up for the initial price in the cost of doing business that tariffs will inevitably and I don't know, again, with the negotiations, I don't know how long that's going to be, and I don't know what it's going to be. But we do know that when you slap tariffs on things, it does, at least initially, make things more expensive. So there's going to be a rise in the cost of doing business. But a lot of people are probably aware of this. But I thought it was interesting, Troy, that you mentioned that it was the small businesses that were the ones complaining about regulations. That is true across the board. Regulations hurt small businesses. Regulations actually help large businesses. So the amount of regulations and also increased taxes that we've had in this country have basically made massive near monopolies, massive corporations that make it really difficult for small corporations and small businesses to compete and get a leg up, because once you are the established massive corporation, you have all the lawyers, you have the ability to hire people to meet regulations. And those large businesses, they actually like regulation. A lot of times they lobby for more regulation, because the harder they can make it to compete, then the better off they do, because they're the top dog. And the new companies rising up the ranks, they literally do not have the time or the resources to meet all of the regulations. And so if we lower regulations, then it allows for the smaller businesses. And I think that's one of the reasons, honestly. I do think allowing China into the global trade market was devastating for like middle America. I was just talking to my mother-in-law about this yesterday. She was mentioning that like when she was really young, middle America had manufacturing, we had like printing shops, we had all these blue collar jobs in all of these smaller communities where people, there aren't like lots of universities, people aren't like, they don't have degrees and stuff like that. But it's fine because we have blue collar jobs. We have easy, you can go get a job at the plant, all that kind of stuff. And she was just pointing out that now, unfortunately, so many of those opportunities are gone. So many of those plants are gone and have gone overseas. And so instead, what we have is a lot of middle America is subsiding off of welfare, essentially, where before there was the middle America was like the soul of the United States, was producing things and making things in factories. And now in those same communities, we have lots of people that don't have any opportunities, and now they're on welfare. And I think two of the biggest reasons for that, in my opinion, is one is increase of regulation, just making it harder to operate small time businesses. It's helpful for the biggest corporations, but it hurts the smallest businesses. Yeah. And the other one is China. And which again, back to my point, I really think we should be not only tariffing China, I think we should go full on sanction China, say we will not trade with you anymore, cut them out of the global market as much as we can, because it, like y'all should point, it's not worth trading with somebody that's such a bad actor when they're breaking into our treasury, stealing our information, stealing our intellectual property, when they have the Communist Party subsidizing their businesses in order to drive out our businesses. It's like, that's not a trade partner that you want to, like, why would we want to be growing their economy and helping them to do that by trading with them, even if it's going to raise the cost of goods and there's going to be a shaky period where we have to recover some of that manufacturing, or we have to find better trade partners than China. Like, I think it's worth cutting them out. I don't want to permanently cut out Europe. I don't want to permanently cut out Mexico and Canada, but I would like to permanently cut out China. Well, but I was getting off point from the regulation point.
Well, we need to do something that makes them operate in the right way, and they're not going to do it on their own. In fact, I want to give an example of a regulation that I saw at a small coffee shop that I met this owner. And when I was running for office in 2020, I asked him, what do you think about these regulations? Because we were talking about it then. And he said he has somebody who comes, an inspector that comes like twice a year, and he tells him, hey, this emergency exit door, it needs a push bar and it needs to open to the outside. And he shows him the policy, and he says, okay, I'll get a new door, or I'll adjust it. And then 6 months later, another inspector comes and says, oh, this door needs to open to the inside because of XYZ and because of your space and this and that. And he's like, what? This dude, and he said it has happened 3 or 4 times. And so he just bought 2 doors, and depending on which guy's coming, he just swaps the door out. Like, you got to be kidding me. You got to be kidding me. And this guy, and so 46% of the American private workforce works for small businesses. 46%, that's less than 500 employees. And so this is a big deal. And so, like you made a good point, Reese, that a lot of big businesses that don't have best interest in mind for everybody want those businesses to fail. But real quick on China, why they shouldn't be in the World Trade Organization. They have unfair trade practices, like we talked about. They have intellectual property violations. They have market access barriers. So actually, if you want to go open a company in the U.S., you have to have joint venture with a China company. Joint venture means you share all your information, all your intellectual property, everything. And guess what? 3 years later, that joint venture says, we don't need you anymore. We don't want a joint venture anymore. And now that's what it is. And now they have your company information. And then they can start selling on the global scale. Like, it's insanity. And then also, you have to have a Communist Party member on your board of directors in China if you have a company. And guess what? The Communist Party of China has access to everything, no matter what they say. They have access to everything. It's called a state capitalism model. And so they also have human rights concerns. And Christians are the number 1 persecuted people group in the world, 1 in 7 Christians. And it's sad to say that's 360 million people around the world. And sad to say that China is a big part of that. And so there's also national security risks and all that. So that's a little primer on some of why China is an issue.
So obviously there's reasons to sanction China and potentially not even do business with them at all. But one of the sad things about it is one of the things I was reading this week is even if we tariff China or sanction China, there's specific ways where they can fight back. And even if the tariffs are there, they can try to evade those tariffs by investing in manufacturing or assembly in a different country, essentially. So it becomes like a whole game where, it's like, okay, here's a new sanction, here's a new tariff. We're going to get around it by doing this. We're going to do that. So it almost feels like an endless struggle, like a wrestling mud wrestling match, where it's like you can never get a grip on the other person because of the mud. But
can I add something for that?
Yeah.
So when I was working in global business, so I've been to China probably half a dozen or 10 times. And I love the people of China that working with China companies or maybe work with the top tier companies in China. I mean, just absolutely incredible. I'm talking about the government and their policies, and what they're doing. And just to clarify, when I was working in this global company, companies would say, oh, China's they're gonna tax or tariff the China stuff imports. So let's just send it through Mexico, or let's just send it through another country. And the U.S. Government got wind of that, obviously, and so now they need to track this. And so then you say, okay, well, we're going to track this back. You got to prove, basically, what's it called, where you have to prove the route that it went. And so, there's ways to stop that as well. But it has to be an all-encompassing strategy. That's the point. And tariffs are just a piece of that. And the removing regulations is absolutely paramount to what we need to have.
Well, here's another point that I want to make about the tariffs that I think has been overlooked. And for me, this is a really important topic because I just think it should be more important, I guess. But I actually just found this out recently. When you look at the White House fact sheet that the Trump administration put out for these tariffs, the biggest point that you'll notice in that fact sheet is that they are trying to stop the trafficking of fentanyl and other drugs into this country. And it actually says, until the crisis is alleviated, Trump is implementing these tariffs on Canada and Mexico because it is such a huge problem in this country right now. And so it's just another element of this big story that it's not just about money. It's not just about bullying or getting your way or whatever. There's something else going on here. And I'm shocked that this isn't talked about as much, considering how much of a problem it is. So
it really isn't. And to add to a detail to that, Doug, a lot of people don't know this, but since we've been talking about China so much, one of the reasons why the tariffs against Canada makes sense until they fix the drug problem is Canada actually there are Chinese gangs that are propped up by the Communist Party that are they're drug gangs, and they're running fentanyl, and they're operating in Canada, and not just shipping fentanyl into the United States, they're shipping it across the world. And this is
I actually have that stat here too, or the documentation for that as well.
And that's one of the things that
too up in Canada.
Yeah, it's crazy. And that was one of the reasons why earlier this year, Trump was threatening not just Mexico, but also Canada. And when he started threatening Canada, there was a lot of people in mainstream media, and especially people who are on the left, that are like, why are you threatening Canada? That we don't have a border crisis with Canada, but that's one of the things that they are either completely oblivious to or purposely overlooking, perhaps.
I think people are oblivious. They have no idea the drugs that are coming out of Canada. Everybody for some reason, we assume like, oh yeah, I get it, like Mexico, because there's like this bad reputation, I guess, for
the drug cartels are more known. We know there's drug cartels in Mexico. I didn't find out recently that there was Chinese gangs in Canada that are running drugs, and the Canadian government just doesn't do anything about it.
Yeah.
And that's where we need to have our leaders put pressure and say, look, you can fix this issue, and you need to fix this issue. And we need to do the same thing with China. You can fix this issue, and you need to fix it, or else. And then, that's where, and Trump has had some of those conversations, but it takes more than a president to do that. We need everybody supporting him, and we need Congress supporting him. And the problem is we got a lot of people that are compromised, or they have their own special interests or their own connections in our American elites and leadership. And so we need to deal with that.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to go ahead and wrap up. So maybe like concluding points. And if you could include in if you have anything on the recession economy, what you think people can expect. I'm going to go ahead and start with, I'm just going to quote Trump. That's what I'm going to say. This is his perspective. This is what he said. He said, there is a period of transition, obviously not completely ruling out the idea of a potential recession. But then he said, because what we're doing is very big, we're bringing wealth back to America, and it takes a little time. Mm-hmm. Another thing he said a little later in the week, when somebody asked him about a potential recession, he said, I don't see it at all. I think this country is going to boom. He also said we've been ripped off for years by other countries, many, many decades. And we saw that same thing. It's very interesting that this is nothing new from Trump, because when we were making the Outlier film last year, one of the clips we included from, I think it was in the 80s when he was younger, he said the same thing. He said, we're making them live like kings and we're not, talking about America being ripped off by other nations. So this is not something that he just pulled out of his pocket last minute. This is a viewpoint he's had for decades, for many decades. So this is I believe there's a much longer term plan here than some people are willing to look at. And I believe we are going to see a boom this year at some point. Maybe it's not going to happen right away. But I believe even with the stocks dropping this last week, I believe things are going to turn around. And it's going to come back.
Yeah. It's called a dead cat bounce. That's what we're hoping for.
Yeah.
What I would say is that this is not, all of these factors are a part of a bigger strategy. And we really need to strike now while we have the momentum and while we have the leadership in place and while we have the attention of the world and Americans paying attention to what's going on here. I mean, if you look at the fundamentals, I used to trade currencies, and the fundamentals, the US dollar should not be strong, but it's strong because 70% of transactions around the world use the dollar. And so we need to keep that going, but we need to get our fundamentals in the right place because we have too much debt. We got too much spending. We got all kinds of issues. And so this is just a part of that momentum to get things back where they should be so that we can continue and to thrive like we have for many years and decades. And so we need to get that place. And so we need to keep the momentum. We need to keep it going. We need to see the bigger picture and understand that this is a piece of a strategy. And we need to continue to support and push our elected leaders to be going that direction and doing what's right for we the people and for Americans' interests.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd say I'm pretty hopeful. I'd say I think we've already seen some of the initial shaking and initial pain of the sort of like the Band-Aid being ripped off, like you guys are talking about with the, I know the stock market was having a dip like this week. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw like an initial raise in some prices and stuff like that. But I'm very hopeful for the things that we talked about before, that like, even if there's some negative consequences that come from the tariffs in the short term, it does seem like Trump's ultimate goal is to bring things down to an even playing field, to pressure countries to do the right thing, to get us back to where we can trade globally without having lots of tariffs against us. And then of course, having not having trading partners that are taking advantage of us like China. So things like that, I think, are definitely needed and need to be done. I'm hopeful that the combined strategies with lowering regulation and hopefully lowering taxes and lowering government spending, and we know excess government spending causes inflation. All these things I know are strategies that are working on at the same time. So with all those pieces connected, I'm hopeful that the little bit of negative things that I do believe we will inevitably see from the tariffs will be offset, and that hopefully the whole trajectory will move us, to a better place. So that's my wrap up.
Yeah, I think it really is just as simple as it's going to hurt for a minute and then long term it's going to be better. But we're just going to have to remember, we're going to have to train our long term memory and stop being so ADD about it and moving moment to moment, emotionally. This is the long game, and hopefully we just remember that as a country.
Yeah, I think the group think that happens nowadays because everybody's so invested in the social media world. Like you said, Doug, it's like we need to retrain our long-term brain again as a society. The groupthink is so jump here. It's emotionally driven, and it's not so much intellectually driven. I feel like, and maybe we need to move back towards that. But yeah, that's a wrap. That's what we got. So if y'all are tuning in, thank you so much for joining us. This is our first official live stream, so you can say we knew them before they were big. If you have not subscribed, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And if you enjoyed this, maybe share it around, let people know. And we will be doing another live stream soon. So see you later.